You're listening to Worshipology with Kurtis Parks, a biblical, practical, and spiritual conversation about leading and living worship. For more information, resources, and to get the book Worshipology, go to kurtisparks.com. Now, let's lean into today's episode.
Well, hey, thanks so much for listening to the Worshipology podcast. This is a podcast for worship leaders, worship teams, and worshipers of Jesus. And today I met Alex. We were just talking about this 2021 at a CMN conference down in Texas. And phenomenal drummer, has an incredible heart for the local church, an incredible heart for Jesus. Alex Ruata, say what's up to the Worshipology community, man.
Hey, everyone. I'm excited to be here. And Kurtis, I'm excited to hang out with you, man. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, dude, of course, man. And, one of the fun things about the world of Instagram and just social media is that you kind of get to see a little bit of a window in people's life and ministry and what they're up to. And I just love Alex's Instagram page. We're going to put a link to his Instagram on our show notes. But man, so many videos of you just crushing it on the drums and doing different covers and throwing your creative spin on these worship songs, man. Like, dude, how did you, just share a little bit of your story. Like, how did you get started in ministry and worship and drumming? What's the Alex Ruata story for those who may not know you, man?
All right. I'm going to try and condense this as much as possible. It's a great long journey. But I was born and raised in church. So ministry has been a part of my DNA for 31 years. I'm 31 years old. So it's been a nice long journey. With music, I developed at a very young age. It was a God-given talent. But the craft really didn't start like beginning to blossom and mold until I was about 13, 14 years old. And a lot of my music foundation was from the Integrity Hosanna Music series. I don't know if many people are familiar with that, but if you're not, you need to go look that up. That's what really skyrocketed the worship movement, especially in the 90s. My mentors from afar that I listened to, because that was the only music I could listen to growing up, was the combination of Chester Thompson. If he played for Ron Canoli, Lift Him Up, God is Able.
Yeah.
Carl Albrecht, he played with Ron Canoli, Don Moen, Paul Balash, Paul Wilbur, etc.
Yeah, man.
Legends. Steve Brewster on the Nashville side and with Linda Cooley. And John Hammond was another one. So I just listened to these guys growing up. I would just listen to the music and get the feel. Had a practice pad and sticks, and I would just be listening to the feel, and even music videos. If I could see them, I'd be watching, taking notes on how they played, the groove, the feel, the eye contact. Whenever the video would show, like when they're making eye contact with the other musicians or the music director, and really just learning how to develop the feel and develop the style, emulate them, but also stay true to who you are. So that's really my music upbringing up to this point. Wow. I mean, to this point, I'm still learning from them. I still go back and I take some notes and get inspired.
You know, it's interesting. You just said something that kind of reminded me when I was first getting into touring with a band. And, because we're watching all of these artists that we really liked. And, for me, it was more on the rock side of things before I focused fully on worship music. But the idea of like, being inspired by a certain artist or a certain musician, but then also developing your own sound and your own feel. Talk to me a little bit about that, because you definitely have a style and you can catch it on your drumming. But then, like you just said, you've been influenced and inspired by so many different drummers. How can you do that? Let's say if you're a guitarist or you're a keyboard player, or you're a bass player that's listening. How do you take influence and get inspiration, but also kind of find your own sound in the midst of that?
The way I would say it, especially with worship music, these guys were doing worship music. So seeing the passion and the energy that they have, that's what makes it contagious. That's what makes you want to listen and to learn. Because if we've had this conversation before, but if you're not enjoying what you do and you're not into what you're doing, the people off the stage, they're going to see that. They're going to recognize that. And they're not going they're not going to feel it. They're going to be like, all right, it's just bland. He's not having fun.
Yeah.
That's why, like, for me, I really get into it. I show a lot of emotion, a lot of passion in playing. And that just goes for every single musician: drums, bass, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, keyboard. The passion and the energy is really the secret to learning and perfecting your craft, working on your craft.
Yeah, it's so good, man. You do that really well. Like, you can obviously tell, when you're drumming, it's something like you just hit it on the head. Like, if you're not enjoying yourself, and you're not enjoying your calling, and, for me, like, if I'm not enjoying leading worship or singing up there, or if I'm not enjoying, what I'm basically called to do, that comes through so quickly. And, we talk a lot about authenticity in the worship world, but you can tell people's kind of heart. Like, what do they say? Like, tell your face what your heart is feeling, like show your heart on your face. And, like, man, when you're smiling, you can just tell, like, you've got the joy of the Lord in you. And there's something about engaging with people, even like the eye contact and we would say like stage presence or something like that. Like, if you're miserable on stage and you're leading worship, then there's got to be a disconnect between the lyrics and your heart,
Yeah.
And talk to me a little bit about that. Like how do you, like, let's say you're a musician and you've kind of gotten into this routine and you're starting to kind of feel like you're rinse and repeat, maybe on autopilot. What's a way that, and I don't know if you've ever hit a season like that, Alex, but, like, what's a way that you can, like, get that joy back and get that passion side back of worshiping?
It's very simple. I've definitely been in that season.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing that worked for me was number one, remember why you do what you do in the first place. Like,
yeah, that's good.
Why are you a worship musician? Why are you playing drums? Why are you playing guitar? Like, what's your why? When you remember your why, also remember what the Lord has done for you in your life. He's given you that gift. He's given you that talent. And I tell people, always worship from your heart. For example, like, if you've fallen off the path and you turned and gave your life back to God and He completely healed you and restored you, that's something to get excited about. And that's an energy that you can, just unleash with your instrument in worship. Mm-hmm. And it reignites the passion inside of you. And another thing is, like, just, you got to remember that when worshiping, it's not about you. Yeah. And it's not about your fellow bandmates or the vocalists. It's always about Jesus. Jesus has always got to be the center and the focus of why you're doing what you do in the first place. If He's not the focus, if He's not the center, then pretty much you're playing in vain. It's like that scripture says, unless the Lord builds the house, He labors in vain.
That's really good. And I think once you realize that, Jesus is always worthy of praise, then whatever current circumstance you find yourself in, it's like, hey, man, God is still the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's still good. He's still worthy of praise. It still gives you a reason to worship. And I think that's a good reminder for anybody. Like, remember your why. Yes. Get back to that first love. That's so good, man.
Yes.
Dude, and you guys look like so your home church is Grace Church in Houston.
Correct.
And, if you go to your Instagram page or your YouTube to see some of these drum covers, is that kind of where most of those are happening? And is it just kind of like a simple camera setup there in the cage? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'm just simply capturing everything with GoPro Hero 10. That's the camera that I use. And I'm catching songs from the service itself, and I'll get a USB from our house engineer, and I'll match the audio. That's where a lot of it comes. But every once in a while, I'll post the raw footage where you hear the click and you hear the talk back.
That's
and
cool.
You can kind of hear us, like, kind of hear the dynamic. Like, one time I did a video where it's like what people hear out there and what I hear in my ears. Because people ask me, they're like, how are you guys so in sync? How do you guys, like, how do y'all communicate? Like, do y'all just read each other's minds? Mm-hmm. But then I tell them that's what these in-ears are, so we can hear. And it's like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. So I actually showed them a video like, okay, this is what you're hearing outside in the congregation, but here's what we hear in our ears.
Talk to me a little bit about that, like the relationship between an MD and a drummer, or like let's say there's a worship leader that maybe they don't have a music director or an MD, somebody that can be on that microphone guiding people, or they don't have in-ears, and it's interesting because like as a worship leader, I'm always trying to like speak drums to a drummer, but I don't know if it's really making sense because it's like, yeah, just do this like ka ka, or like just trying to talk drum language. How important is it obviously the drums are kind of like the foundation of the band. Like if the drums fall apart, I think the whole song falls apart. But talk to us about that relationship with the MD and the drummer, or just the worship leader and the drummer, and how you guys do stay in sync, not just dependent on what's going on in the in-ears, but just like through rehearsal and working on the songs, before that service time hits.
Yeah, it's very crucial for all musicians, not just the drummer. But
yeah,
you met my music director, Derek Battle. He and I, we have a really good relationship, good communication. And a lot of times before rehearsal, he's a legend. He's mad genius. Like a lot of the arrangements, it's been from him. Like we'll do some elevation songs, we'll make it gospel-y, and we'll add some hits and lines, and people think like that's an actual elevation album, or they think that's our album. And no, he just changes it up. But what he'll do is he'll make a rough guide track of the new arrangement that of a song that we're gonna do. I'll give one for example, Jehovah. We've been doing that quite often, and he'll reach out to me, and he'll reach out to the bass player, the lead electric, and say, "Hey, I thought about doing something like this. Take a listen to this arrangement, and then let's come to rehearsal and you guys bring your own interpretation." So he gives us creative control, and then we bring it to rehearsal, we'll do it, and then we'll tighten up certain spots that need to be tightened up. But for the most part, he wants us to really get creative and have that producer or arranger mode in our heads of what we want to apply and try to apply it. And then we fix as we move along.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what's your approach to a song and drumming? I mean, you just talked a little bit about, connecting with the MD before the Sunday service. Just in general, when you talk about drumming, you've got this opportunity for creativity, but then you've also got, the other side of it where it's like, man, like stick to the fundamentals, keep the foundation of the song. So when I'm talking like excellence meets creativity, what is that like in your approach to drumming, and especially when it comes to drumming in a worship context? What's that like, Alex?
With the excellence side, it's listening, practicing, and understanding the basic foundation of the song. So that's learn the original MP3, practice with it, and practice with a click. Like now you can get like Ableton, Loop Community, even Playback Pro, and you can get the song, and you can like lower the drums and the click. I don't recommend lowering the click, but some people do. But listen to it and get the feel of it. Once you get that foundation, then you can let the creativity side come about. You can't create without a solid foundation. That's like building a house without a foundation. You got to have the foundation before you can build on it. So, for instance, when we first introduce songs like that, we'll play it like the MP3. So we all get a good feel of it. The church can get a good feel of it, and we can kind of tell from the response, okay, is this a song that we can keep, or is this a song that we're going to move from? Yeah. And if we keep the song, then we're going to add our creative arrangements. And that's some of the videos that are on my Instagram, and I'll even put a caption. Sometimes you got to just add hits and lines. Sometimes you got to get out of the box. And there have even been times where there'll be an interlude in the song or something, and I just pull something out on the spot. Sometimes all of us will pull something random out on the spot. keeping it within time and context. But those are also the fun moments where you can get creative, but also you can get spontaneous in the moment as well. But all of that can't happen if you don't have the basic foundation of any song.
That's really good, Alex. I think, for those who want to add stuff, just realizing let's first get the fundamentals down. Then you've got the leeway for some creativity. That makes a lot of sense, man. Now I'm going to ask you a question. This is kind of maybe selfish and more of like something that, I think as a worship leader who's working with a lot of younger drummers, I just want to know the answer to this question. So, in my time as a worship pastor and worship leader, oftentimes I'd have like drummers that would come in and they have a great feel, but they've never played with a click track. And you know where I'm going with this. Like the click is intimidating. And of course, when you're using multi-tracks and you're using these different resources, it all has to line up to the grid. It all has to be with a click track. So for that drummer who's like maybe grown up or spent the last 3 or 4 years playing without any click, without any in-ears, and now you're switching to this model and format where you're using in-ears and you're dialing in your mix and you're playing with tracks, that can be intimidating. What is like your, hey, baseline, this is the best number one advice that I could give you when you're going from just playing based on feel to now playing with click, guide, and multi-tracks? What's that top tip you have for drummers that might be listening?
Man, so I've been through all of that.
Yeah.
So think of it as when you're a little kid and you're learning how to ride a bike.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get it the first time. You got to have basic steps. Sometimes you got to start with a tricycle or start with training wheels or start with mom and dad, holding on to the bike so you don't fall over. And then eventually you can start riding on your own. With worship music, especially now with like multi-tracks, I was very fortunate growing up. Like click tracks and stems didn't exist, but metronomes did exist.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, when I was a teenager, I was a part of a Lutheran church for a long time. And the worship director that mentored me and that I worked with, he got me playing with a click because that was the first time that I got used to having in-ears on.
Oh, wow.
But then he's like, okay, on my team, because there were other worship leaders and the other they didn't like click.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the main guy. So he's like, okay, on my team, we play with a click track. So you're going to learn how to play with a click track. And then by that time, they started getting like tempo on the phone app.
Oh, yeah.
So what I did was get the tempo of a certain song. Like the first song I played with the click was All Creatures of Our God and King, the David Crowder version.
Nice. Great song.
It's a very simple 4 on the floor. Just listen to the click and just play. Try to lock in, but also don't lose that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Don't feel like you need to be like very like monochromatic, like when you're playing, or just be like a robot. Like play with some feel. Stay with the click. Stay in the pocket, but have some fun. Groove with it. And then later on, stems and everything came along. So to kind of boil it all down, if you're able to, and you get the Playback Pro, kind of turn all the instruments down and just leave the click on and just start playing. And then slowly add the other instruments and get used to the feel of playing with a click track with stems involved.
Mm-hmm.
What we're about to start doing at Grace, because I'm not only on the worship staff as the main house drummer, but I also play for our young adult ministries and our youth ministries. And I mentor the youth drummers. I got a couple of young drummers under me.
Mm-hmm.
So we're about to start doing like a worship workshop where we can have all of the musicians come in.
Yeah.
And we basically just show them how to work with the Behringer P16s. That's what we have in our youth auditorium, and how to adjust like the guitars, the vocals, and then you can turn down the tracks but keep the click up. That's how I am. I turn stems down and I keep the click up.
Okay.
Because I can hear the cues but also the talk back. Of course, that's my personal preference. but having that kind of a foundation and someone to help you along. But the main thing that I encourage everyone is don't get discouraged if you don't get it the first time. We say at the church, when people come to know Christ, remember your relationship with God is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people, learning how to play with the click and tracks, it's a marathon. You have to keep practicing, you got to keep training. But it's also encouraging for them whenever I say, hey, I didn't get it the first time. It took me quite a bit of time to get used to click and stems, and even getting used to a music director like in my ear, like calling out a bunch of cues and lines and everything. So it's all just a working process. The key is being patient and being persistent.
That's great advice, man. I love the idea of you guys doing a worship workshop, because we're actually toying with that same idea at Destination Church, and just, having a 1-day workshop where we bring in musicians from, bass players, keyboard players, guitarists, drummers, even aux instruments like cello and violin, whatever you're doing, come in for that 1-day workshop and then just kind of learn some of the basics without the pressure of having to get it right away. And I think that's such a huge opportunity, especially for youth that are trying to, maybe get on a worship team for the very first time. And I think it's just really cool, man. Like, when it comes to those worship workshops, is that something that you guys do once a year, or is it kind of just on an as needed basis?
So this is something that we're going to start doing, but I think we want to do it one time and kind of see the response of it. But the aim would be probably to do it once a quarter.
Dude, talk to me a little bit about, as you've drummed, like you just said, youth and young adults and a main service on a Sunday, so you're drumming probably many different styles, different songs, different, worship movements and stuff like that, kind of very adaptable in that. What is like the number one trait that you would say that makes a great worship drummer? What is that one thing you need to have when it comes to just drumming in a worship context, a worship environment, no matter what size church you're in?
It's really all about your heart posture and your mindset. Our church is a pretty big church, so we have a lot of people that come through. So it's always big. And some other places I play at, they're a little bit smaller, but it's always about you want to make sure that you avoid that performance mentality. Saying like, okay, there's not that many people here. Okay, I'm not going to go as all out as I normally would. That's the wrong mentality to have, because first of all, it's not like giving glory to God. It's more about you. You're making it more about yourself.
Yeah, that's good.
And not your worship unto God. Have a posture of worship, but also have an attitude of humility and flexibility, because every worship leader, every team is different. One worship leader might not lead the way you're used to with the leader you are every week.
Right.
So you got to be flexible. That's the big thing.
Yeah, just maintaining flexibility. That will preach for every instrument, every musician up there, because I think, like you said, the thing with worship teams is that they're in and out all the time. And so, we've got 3 or 4 different bass players that rotate, 3 or 4 different key, all of those things, but you have to have that flexibility and that adaptability to be able to play with whoever's on that particular week and then gel. I mean, that's where it comes to that heart posture that you're talking about, like making it about, that humble worship heart that's just all about really just glorifying God at the end of the day. Like, that's what we're doing. We just get the opportunity to lead others in doing that. That's so good, man. Dude, I got to ask you this. So share just like one crazy story. You've been drumming not only in the local church, but you travel with a little bit of ministries and of course like the recording side of everything. Dude, what's just like one powerful story that kind of sticks out to you from worshiping from the drum set, where you just felt like, man, God's presence was just so thick in the room during that time of worship?
We had our first worship night in February. So last month, with our young adults, we do a worship night. And our youth, we do a worship night once a quarter.
That's cool.
God's just been moving in our young adults ministry, and we've been averaging to this date 900 to almost 1,000 young adults from all over Houston.
Wow.
That come on a regular Tuesday night.
That's
And
amazing.
this worship night, we get like little platforms. We put everything. We get rid of all the chairs.
Mm-hmm.
We put the platforms in the middle, and we're all kind of angled. But we had 1,300 young adults present that night, and we were just worshiping our heart out. We were flowing, being spontaneous. We have our set list, but our prayer is always, Lord, wherever you want to go, we're going to follow. But there was a moment where we completely just broke down. Like, we just stopped. I kept time on the hi-hat, but to hear the whole venue erupt with so many young adults like singing and worshiping, and then just them building up, but just the presence, the atmosphere, like God was just in the room. People were just getting touched. People were just falling on the floor, just posturing in worship towards God. And there was a lot of singing and dancing and rejoicing. And that night, that was just what was powerful for me, because it's people my age, like in the age range, young adults.
Yeah.
They've come with such a hunger and expectation for God, and it's been the same with the youth and with our Sunday services. But that night specifically, with our young adults worship night, that was a powerful moment that I witnessed, because I've been there since the beginning, so I've seen all the growth and all the weeds and all the stuff that's had to been pulled out and purged to get to where we're currently at. So to see like all of this happening is just, it's a very powerful feeling.
It is really cool when you've seen a ministry go from just a seedling to like now it's like blossoming into a tree, and just how God's able to use that. But I think what you said about just a room filled with voices, like, and in that space where it just fills with worship, like there's something about that atmosphere. And it's usually in those stripped down moments, man. Like you said it, dude. It's like, those are the moments that you remember, that you end up talking about with your team afterwards. And it's just something special when the room fills up with a congregation and they're just praising with everything they've got, man. That's, I can just picture that right now, man. That's just awesome, dude. Well, you hit it a little bit earlier. I know you do some recording, and I just kind of like to steer the conversation just for a couple minutes in that direction. Like, when it comes to recording, like most of the stuff we've talked about thus far, probably in that live context, like that, Sunday comes every week kind of idea, where it's like, in the moment, in the live, you get your MD and the in-ears and everything's kind of synced and locked and loaded. When you approach recording for a project, what's the differences, or are there any differences, when you're drumming for a record? Is it kind of like, all right, let's keep it to the basics. Like, let's not, get super creative, or is there the opposite where it's like, no, this is our chance to go all out? What does that look like for you, Alex, when you go to recording on drums? And the reason I'm asking today is we're actually tracking drums for our next single. So it's like super on the forefront of my mind, man. And I just love to hear your approach on that.
Yeah, so with the church, we've recorded one, released one, and then we recorded another one, and that one will probably get released later on, maybe in June, if I want to say. I'm not entirely sure, so don't quote me on that.
All right.
But the process, we've done the song like in the church, and then we decided to record. So we all get together and we decide to do something basic, just put a basic guide track, because we want to make it singable for the congregation, but also we want to make it simple for, one day, let's say one day I'm touring and I'm not at church on Sunday.
Right.
Or our bass player or our guitar player, they're out. We want to make that song simple for somebody else to come in, or one of our volunteers to listen to the song and be able to pick it up. And it's not overly complicated. But at the same time, we're able to put our feel and our creativity into it. So with our songs, we try and do our own arrangements. We make it us, but we don't want to let our creativity get so far gone or off the rails to where other people that aren't at the prestige level that we're at not be able to to catch the song or get frustrated with trying to learn the song.
Right.
So we want to try to make it simple. Be creative, but keep it tight and simple at the same time.
That's really good.
In regards to recording for other people, because I've done some remote projects and it's even demos, that really depends on the producer and the artist.
Okay.
Like a lot of times they will just want something basic and they'll send you like a guide track and they say, hey, this artist wants it very simple. Try and keep it to this. Maybe add like 10% of some extra feel. But for the most part, let's try to line it up like this. But other times I'll get some other people that are like, hey, this is a simple guide track, but I want you to put your feel into it.
Yeah.
Play this song how you would play it at Grace. You know, I have one Christian artist from San Angelo, Texas, and he recorded a project and he told me give him a Ron Kenoly Ancient of Days kind of feel.
Nice.
Which already that spoke to me already. I was like, okay, you know what you're asking for, right? Kind of a deal.
Are you going to open Pandora's box here, man?
So when it comes to that, it's just being mindful of what the producer and the artist wants.
Yeah.
You always want to serve the song and serve the artist. And with the church, you want to serve the house.
That's really good, man. Well, I like the balance, you know, between the there's like, yeah, let's get creative. Let's not make everything super vanilla and, you know, just, you know, boring in a sense. But like, then there's the other side where it's like, yeah, you never know who's going to pick up the drumsticks and try to drum this song. So you want to make it manageable and accessible for everybody. I think that's probably a great guideline just for people that, you know, maybe you're exploring doing a record with your church or even doing a solo album, wherever you're at on the recording spectrum. I think keeping those two things in mind, get creative, have fun. Don't get locked into a, you know, everything has to be, you know, the baseline simple as can be. So add your creativity, but then yes, keep it manageable to the sense of like, you never know who's picking up the song and they want to replicate that as close as they can to the parts. And I think that's the cool thing about even when you're listening to a worship record that's already out there, like, you know, say your worship pastor hands you a song from, you know, Hillsong, Bethel, Elevation, Mav City, whoever it might be, you know, the parts that are on the record are parts that they spent months like perfecting the guitar tones. You know, it's like, I mean, you know, as a drummer, I mean, it's like, man, we thought, does this beat work best or does this beat work best? Maybe a tom groove here. And you just kind of hash over the parts. So whatever made it on the album, it's like, yeah, we should probably try to pull that off because they've probably sat with this song way longer than we did. And, you know, that's kind of why I was literally having this conversation last week with a musician where it's like, hey, are we cool to like do whatever we want with a song? And I'm like, well, you know, there's the flexibility to be creative, but also remember, like, these parts are there for a reason. Like, best parts won out at the end of the day. And to honor the song by like trying to play it as close as you can to the record, I think that's really good advice, Alex. Let me ask you this in our time remaining, man. You got just a few more minutes here, and this is a question I love just asking everybody on the podcast, man. And this kind of just dives in a little bit deeper to just your personal walk with the Lord, man. Like, dude, what's the Holy Spirit been speaking to you lately? What's that thing on repeat that you feel like the Lord is just resonating in your heart?
What I have seen come to pass is that God is always faithful to his word. And that's when I talked about earlier, was saying like being patient, but being persistent.
That's really good.
Don't give up on the dreams that you have. Keep working hard. Keep serving where you're at with a spirit of excellence. And don't get discouraged whenever things don't happen in your own time. In fact, I got a note right here because I thought about this. Yesterday, we're in a series leading up to Easter. This quote right here that our youth pastor mentioned, it really ministered to me, but I know it can help somebody else out there. You have dreams and goals and desires, and you're praying and asking God to open those doors, and it feels like nothing's happening. Just remember that God's delays is not God's denial.
That's good.
So just because it's not happening when you want it, that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen later on. It's all in God's timing, not your timing.
Wow.
So before God opens that door in his timing, stay faithful with where you're at, but also evaluate stuff in your life. Is there an area in your life that's not pleasing to God, or is there an area you need to tighten up before God can bless you abundantly with what he wants to do? We got to do inventory and preparation on our end to be ready for when that time comes, when that opportunity happens. So that's just what the Lord's just been speaking to me, that his word, his promises never fail. His word never returns void.
So good, man. Well, I think that's great advice to go out on. Be patient, be persistent, and trust in God's timing, man. Alex, dude, so good to chat with you. Listen, we're going to put just some contact info in our show notes, as well as links to Alex's Instagram and YouTube, where you can check out some of the stuff that he's doing on drums. And man, always a pleasure to chat with you, whether it's in person or here on the podcast, man. Thanks for joining us on Worshipology, bro.
You've been listening to Worshipology with Kurtis Parks. To learn more and find resources for your team, you can visit kurtisparks.com and grab the book at worshipologybook.com.